Kichana Sadaka Moroto Kichuna Moroguno
So I remember we were all very excited, and the customs doors were opening and closing, and I remember jumping up as the customs doors opened and closed to try to catch a glimpse of Srila Prabhupada. And I recall my first glimpse of Prabhupada was he was standing very patiently. He had his attaché case in one hand, he had his cane in another, and he had his chadar folded and over his shoulder. And he appeared to be very, very effulgent and very peaceful. And he appeared to be waiting for something. In fact, he was waiting for Bhagavan, who had been held up at immigration. In fact, immigration authorities told him that he could not enter the country because he did not have a visa. They had warned him in Singapore that he would not be able to come into Australia without a valid visa, but somehow they'd let him join the plane in Singapore. Now, Prabhupada was waiting for Bhagavan, and it appeared that Bhagavan, who is Prabhupada's secretary for the trip, or rather servant, it appeared that Bali Madan would not be able to be allowed into the country, Bhagavan. So Bhagavan, he explained to the immigration man that even though he did not have a visa, he was married to an Australian, because in fact Prabhupada had married him to Padmavati in the Cross Maidan Pandal program in Bombay in front of 30,000 people a few days or a few weeks before. He remembered this, and he told the immigration man that even though he didn't have a visa, he was married to an Australian. So the immigration man asked him for his marriage certificate. He told him that he didn't have one, but he did have a photograph of his wedding. So he showed the man the photograph of his wedding, and in the photograph was a picture of Prabhupada performing the wedding ceremony. And the immigration man had noticed when Prabhupada came through, and he was somehow or other moved by seeing Prabhupada. This was the main man in the office. The man at the desk had sent Bhagavan to speak to the head man. So the head man sent Bhagavan back with a stamp in his passport, indefinite stay. So he showed his passport to the man at the desk, who was incredulous, but nevertheless Bhagavan could understand this was Prabhupada's potency, and Bhagavan then was able to come through. So we were waiting for some time. Prabhupada entered the airport terminal. There was a huge kirtan, and it appeared that the whole airport stopped. And Prabhupada attracted a very, very large crowd. There were photographs taken, and it was quite amazing how many people were actually crowded around at the time. Everything appeared to come to a standstill. Of course, Churu had told all the ladies, when Prabhupada comes through, don't scream. And of course, when the Prabhupada came through, all the ladies screamed. And everybody paid their obeisances. They paid dandabats, full dandabats. In those days, you might have seen from our videos, the ladies used to pay their dandabats too. So everyone just paid dandabats wherever they were, and Prabhupada couldn't move because we were just crisscrossing the path. And a lot of devotees just stayed down there, and they didn't move. They didn't know, weren't sure how long they were supposed to stay down there. They just stayed. So some devotees had to tap them on the shoulder and say. So then we stood up, and there was a nice kirtan, and we were following Prabhupada through the airport terminus. Now, I don't recall the press conference, but there definitely was one. We were all fairly delirious. Churu recalls that when he paid his obeisances at Prabhupada's arrival, he banged his head on the floor so heavily that he had a mild concussion. And everything was very, very hazy. But we were all delirious in some way or other, spiritually or materially, and I don't remember the press conference, but in the newspaper there was a very nice description of the press conference where Prabhupada described how there were 4 orders of life: brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha and sannyas. The press reporter had written a very paka article and had quoted all these Sanskrit names, spelling them properly, which was quite amazing. And Prabhupada described that he was in the 4th order of life, which meant now his business was to travel and preach. And Prabhupada's arrival was noted in the Sydney Morning Herald, the Australian, and one Sydney daily newspaper. although at the time we were not familiar with accessing the newspapers. I don't know how many of us knew that those things were in the paper at the time, but looking through the archives, we found this information with some nice pictures of Prabhupada.
One question was by a reporter who asked, he asked Prabhupada, yours is a very ascetic movement, isn't it? And Prabhupada says, no. And then he said, but isn't yours more a self-denial type of lifestyle? And Prabhupada said, no, we teach love of God. And then the reporter said, but don't you think that, you know, we've seen and we've heard that you're going to be taken away from here in a Rolls Royce? We'd previously hired a Rolls Royce with a chauffeur and everything like that. It wasn't a new Rolls Royce, kind of an old Rolls Royce, but you know, it had the Rolls Royce label and everything, so it was quite significant to the press. And so Prabhupada said, well, we can use everything in Krishna's service. If someone offers me a Rolls Royce, why should I refuse it? He said that Guru is God's representative. Everything is meant to be used in God's service. So he said, Krishna, he rides in a gold chariot. And he said, what is this Rolls Royce? Some tin, some rubber, some wood? He said, I say it is not enough. That with all the devotees go, Jai Prabhupada. So I was thinking beforehand, this is, you know, should we be doing this? Whose idea was this, this Rolls Royce? I was a little bit worried of what would people think about this, you know. It's a little ostentatious, some vainglorious or something like that, or, you know. But then, you know, Prabhupada's answer was so bold that even the press, who are used to sort of being sharp and with a quick response and a quick reply to practically anyone, but there was just a silence. I mean, they were so shocked by Prabhupada's response that they just were flabbergasted. They just couldn't say any more. Jai Prabhupada, we paid our obeisances. Some silence, and Prabhupada said, Jai, chant Hare Krishna. And then Prabhupada got up and we had kirtan to the car. He went into the Rolls Royce and drove away. And
the very first time I saw Prabhupada was when I went down to the domain in Sydney. For every Sunday the devotees would go and speak there. And on this particular weekend, the devotees said I had to come back to the temple because Prabhupada was speaking there. The spiritual master had come from America and from India. And so I went to the temple to see Srila Prabhupada, but he didn't give the lecture. He had Hanuman Swami give the lecture, which impressed me because I thought, well, I'd already read Easy Journey to Other Planets, which I got off from a devotee on the street, and I was very impressed by that book, in as much as I realised that it wasn't about going to other planets at all. So I thought this guru knows how to attract different people, and for a higher purpose. So I already had this idea, and so when I went to the temple and Prabhupada wasn't speaking, somehow or other it had the effect of making me think that the knowledge was absolute and he wasn't promoting himself as a personality, and that really impressed me. And after the lecture, I somehow drifted towards the temple and went in one side of the kitchen, and Srila Prabhupada got up from the Vyasasana, and he arrived at the opposite kitchen door at the same time as I came through the other door. And so Prabhupada stopped and looked at me, and I went like this. I thought he was, and I realised he was actually looking at me, not my body, just at me. And I thought he was looking at someone else, and so I sort of stared back at him, and he gave me this look, like a disgusted look, like, you know, where have you been, sort of thing, you know. And that Prabhupada's eyes riveting me had a very profound effect on me.